This is a lecture from Open Tuition. To benefit from the lecture, you should download the free lecture notes from opentuition.com.
So let's go through and look at the final piece of this chapter, which is all about the regulatory body. So we've looked at the regulatory environment, what that is all about. We've gone through there as well and looked at ethics and how ethics goes through there and ensures that the rules and the principles within that regulatory environment are upheld to the highest professional standards. We now go through there and look at the regulatory body. So the bodies, the institutions that go through there and create the accounting rules. Okay, so the regulatory bodies, as I said, create the frameworks, create the standard, create the rules. What we have there are your IFRSs, so your international financial reporting standards. Remember, they are international, so they are essentially global, aren't they? Okay, you have there a global set of accounting standards that are prepared on an international conceptual framework, aren't they? Okay, that underlies, if you like, the principles that we then follow and apply to all the accounting standards. The other alternative, as opposed to using IFRSs, is that you could use your local GAAP, so generally accepted accounting practice. Sometimes people refer to it as principles, but I think the correct definition there would be practice. Okay, they are what follow, if you like, your local framework. Although if it's American based, that tends not to have a framework that it is focused upon, because this is very rules based. Okay, I think that then covers the next bit, doesn't it? I think we've already spoken there about principles based and where we have rules based. Again, I think we mentioned earlier that principles based, there is a little bit more judgment, allows a little bit, if you like, more subjectivity, whereby rules based, because there are no fundamental principles to follow. There are just specific rules for specific areas of accounting. So if you like, less judgment and less subjectivity. Okay. So having already really seen that, I suppose we then just need to move on and think about who sets everything internationally. Okay. So IFRSs are developed and published by the IASB, so the International Accounting Standards Board. Okay. It goes on there, talks about the number of members that we have, talks about the full. Bleh, what a load of nonsense. I've just put that in as factual correctness, okay, to make sure that it is there. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. What I would be concerned about is what the IASB actually do. Okay, yes, they develop and publish your IFRSs, but they have ultimate responsibility for all technical matters. Okay, so that is the preparation and the publication of your IFRSs. And as well as IFRSs, they also, if you like, produce exposure drafts, which, if you like, are draft accounting standards. Okay, so when we update an accounting standard, as we'll speak about in a moment, it goes through a particular process, and one of the steps in the process is to draw up a draft accounting standard, or if you like, a draft rule within the accounting standard, and those draft rules are referred to as exposure drafts. So it's the IASB's responsibility to prepare that and publish it. Likewise, as well, it's also responsible for the withdrawal of IFRSs. So recently, we've had the withdrawal of a standard on revenue to be replaced by a new standard on revenue. We've also gone through as well and withdrawn the standard on leases and replaced it with a new standard on leases. Okay, and also as well, if we have a new standard, people need to understand how to interpret that new standard. So there will be a committee that issues interpretations upon that standard, and the IASB is responsible for the final approval. I think that's important there. Of the interpretations, there is another body that goes through there and actually prepares the interpretations. Okay. So the IASB, pretty responsible there in terms of what it has to do. But the key bit that you have sitting above it is the IFRS Foundation. Okay, so the IFRS Foundation oversees everything that the IASB does. So essentially, the IASB will report to the IFRS Foundation. The objectives of the foundation and essentially of the board, because the board are doing the foundation's work, is that they need to develop a set of high quality, understandable, enforceable, and globally accepted international accounting standards. Okay, so that's the aim, isn't it? Okay, you want to develop a set of accounting standards that everybody can use. Okay, and when we say everybody and to make it international, we obviously need to get the Americans on board, like we've mentioned before, because otherwise, without the Americans on board and that process of convergence, then we don't really have a truly set of international standards, do we? Okay. Once they've been developed, we then need to promote the use and the application of them. It's fine having them, but we need to then spread the word into other countries and get them to try and adopt these standards. And that's going to go through there, isn't it? And help you develop the standards in your emerging economies. Okay. These IFRSs, they are large, there's lots to them. So we want to make sure there that these emerging economies with a lot less resources than those more developed economies are able to use and apply those standards. One of the other issues that we have as well is that IFRSs are very much geared towards your large listed multinational companies. So what we want to try and do is we want to try and ensure that those standards can be adapted to go through and be used by much smaller entities. So it refers to there as says the word small and medium-sized entities. Now, I think that's a little bit of not a mistake, but it's a little bit of an understatement. That those large entities essentially are listed, but the way in which the standards talk about small and medium-sized entities are essentially an entity that is not listed. And within the country that you're studying, I'm sure there are a lot of businesses there that are large that are not necessarily listed. Okay, but IFRSs say, well, you are a small or medium-sized entity. Maybe IFRSs are too complex. I don't know. I'd have thought not for some genuinely not SMEs, but for a business that is small or is genuinely medium, the standards are too complex. Okay, so we can produce an abbreviated set of standards and we refer to them as IFRSs for SMEs. But that's beyond the scope of the syllabus, and I'm just waffling along there, so we shall stop there. Okay. Likewise, as well, the other big one is all about convergence, isn't it? Making sure that we get the Americans on board, developing a set of high quality standards that are principles based primarily, but essentially have more detail to be able to adapt to the situations whereby countries have previously used a rules based standard. Okay, so we're still principles focused, but principles with, if you like, a bit more detail. Okay. So that's what the IFRS Foundation's aims are. They are the overseeing or governing body. There's a couple of others that we need to think about. The Advisory Council, they go through there and advise. But the rules there specifically that they consult with local standard setters, academics, and other interest parties. So if you like, as well as giving advice, they accept advice. If people are unhappy with a particular accounting standard, they will go through there and report back to the Advisory Council, and the Advisory Council will go through there and report to the IASB. And this is then the IASB's responsibility to go through there and develop those new accounting standards. Okay. And then you have the IFRS Interpretations Committee. They are responsible for reviewing new reporting issues. So whatever has been raised by the Advisory Council, the Interpretations Committee will review it to see what the issue is. And then they will also issue guidance on the application of the IFRSs. Like we said before, new standard, new rules. People need advice on how to account for it. Okay. There's just a couple of other bits and pieces which may be thrown in. IOSCO is the International Organization of Securities Commissions. So that's a regulatory body that looks at the markets that are, if you like, trading in securities. So people like, if you like, the London Stock Exchange, New York Stock Exchange would all be there as part of the International Organization of Securities Commissions. Okay, and then FASB is the American equivalent of the IASB. They are responsible for developing US accounting standards, exposure drafts on US accounting standards, but they are primarily at the moment working alongside the IASB on that process of convergence. And then before we go through and just attempt one of the questions, we mentioned there, didn't we, about what happens when we have a new accounting standard. So the process is nice and simple. Make sure that you remember it. Okay. If you don't, then you're going to struggle. Again, I think it could be one of those drag and drop questions whereby you drag the possible answer into the correct box in chronological order. Okay. So to develop a standard, you have, if you like, an advisory committee. So people report into the IFRS advisory committee about the issues that they currently see in accounting standards. And what you see there is that they will develop what is referred to as a work plan. If you're really interested by this, which you may or may not be, if you put into an internet search engine, IASB work plan, you'll be able to go through there and see the work that they are looking to commit to and develop over the foreseeable future. At the moment in the notes it mentions, is it IFRS 9 financial instruments, IFRS 13 fair value. As we are recording this, we have even more up-to-date, newer standards in IFRS 15 revenue and IFRS 16 leases, both of which are due to take effect in the coming years. Okay, but there are other issues that the the IFRS Advisory Committee are working with the IASB to put together in the work plan. Once the issue has been identified, we will then ask for people's comments, and those comments are put together in a discussion paper. So academics, people that work in industry, people that work in accountancy practices will submit their comments based on the work plan and the issues, and that will be summarised in a discussion paper. Once the discussion paper has been put together and everybody has read through it, again, people will comment upon that discussion paper. So people will be invited to comment upon it, whether they consider that to be a large issue, a small issue, something that can be addressed or something that cannot be addressed, or maybe it is not material enough to warrant the time and the effort. Okay. Once that's been done, we then have an exposure draft. So essentially that is the draft IFRS. It puts together the draft rules that we are considering for the new standard. So there will be an exposure draft when we were trying to develop the standard on fair value. Again, you can look at the exposure draft if you do an online search for your revenue standard for your leases. Just put it into an internet search, exposure draft revenue, exposure draft leases. They're not hundreds and hundreds of pages, okay, anything from 5, 10, 15, 20 pages max, and a nice summary therein of the new rules. Once we've got that, we then issue the IFRS. Once it's issued, it will then either be decided that it will be adopted, or as has been the case quite recently with the revenue standard, it was adopted for a particular date, but it was then decided that the changes would be so large and so time consuming that it was then delayed for a further year to ensure that the people who were going to apply the standard actually went through there and had time to develop their systems and to do the training. Okay, so that's the process: the advisory committee, discussion paper, exposure draft, IFRS. Okay, you can go through there, have a look at the last little question that we have there within the notes. You tend to see quite a few of these not style questions. Which of the following would not be regarded as a responsibility of the IASB? Okay, the International Accounting Standards Body. Okay, so are the IASB responsible for all IFRS technical matters? Yes, they are. Okay, so that's a yes, they are responsible. So that is not the answer, is it? Okay, does it go through there and publish IFRSs? I think it does, doesn't it? Again, that's another one of its roles, isn't it? Is it the overall supervisory body of the IFRS organisations? Be careful here. That's the trick, okay? Because it isn't. It oversees the IFRS Advisory Council. It oversees the IFRS Interpretations Committee, but it is not the overall supervisory body. Remember, the overall supervisory body is the IFRS Foundation, isn't it? Okay. So that is not a responsibility of the IASB. The IASB reports up to the IFRS Foundation. Just to double check, D, does the ISB have final approval of interpretations? Yes. Okay, they have. The Interpretations Committee pull together the interpretations and then the ISB approves it. So that is a responsibility and therefore not the answer. Okay, excellent. So it can be quite tricky, can't it, in terms of how you piece it all together. So again, read the notes, read the background text in terms of the study materials, but I think the information that I've given you there is more than enough to be able to practice the questions in any of the revision kits. Work them through. This is purely knowledge, so it should be pretty straightforward once you have gained that knowledge. The more questions you practice, the easier it becomes. So get stuck into the questions. If you get it wrong, look at the answer, learn from the answer, and then your knowledge will improve very, very quickly indeed.